warm welcome to episode 3 in this series of conversation that we are having with Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar, Founding Vice-Chancellor, O.P. Jindal Global University. Taking off from the previous 2 conversations that we had with Professor Raj Kumar, today we asked Professor Raj about the transition from school to university and the choices that he made in this transition, and we asked him about his college life both at Loyola College in Chennai and at Delhi University. Many of our young viewers who are about to make certain very important choices in their life and looking at that transition from schools to universities may really resonate with many of the questions that we are going to ask Professor Raj. Raj, the transition from schools to college, it has never been an easy transition. Students get really anxious about how to negotiate that, the shift, the transition. How was it for you, this transition from your school life to your life at Loyola College?
Yeah, so, it was a lot of challenges in terms of the untold pressures that one goes through. I mean, as I told you earlier, the dominant thinking was to be able to become a doctor or engineer. But that was clearly not the case. That already got decided when I ended up choosing the group in my 11th grade. In Chennai itself, there were very few choices, and Loyola was in many ways an obvious choice. I studied in a Jesuit institution for my schooling, and so Loyola was known to be a fantastic institution, but also for its own BCom program, it was very well known. Okay. So I was very conscious of the fact that I want to go into an institution which is going to help me also be part of a lot of history as well. Loyola is nearly 100-year-old institution. Now it's, of course, known for its BCom program across the country, but even then, it had a fantastic class. It attracted students from across the state of Tamil Nadu. And that was one of the reasons why I had chosen Loyola. And it was a great experience of joining the BCom program. Although I must confess that it was not, I was all so clear about everything. One of the things that we see among young students today is that there is a greater degree of clarity among a lot of people, but there are people who are not so clear about what they want to do. Yeah. And I have to say that allow yourself to, discover the journey, because the journey and discovery is equally important as much as the destination.
So beautifully put. But tell me one thing, when you applied to Loyola College, were you applying to other colleges as or we were,
Yeah, so there was another college which is also a fantastic college called the Vivekananda College, located in Chennai itself. It's also a very reputed college. But the choice was so much in favor of Loyola for me for the reasons I mentioned. And I also felt that having studied in St. Bede's Anglo-Indian Higher Secondary School before, there was a natural transition to Loyola, both in terms of its institutional culture and the kind of offerings it had. It also had good reputation for their BCom program, and that's why I ended up choosing Loyola.
Raj, you joined Loyola College, and many institutions, unfortunately, perhaps not so much anymore, but there was one point where ragging was a very big issue. So students, when they came into a college or an institutions of higher education, would always be worried about that part. So did you have to face anything like that?
Yeah, so in 1991, when I graduated from high school, when I was going to Loyola, a lot of people advised me about being, I should be conscious of it and I may be ragged. Quite remarkably, I was very fortunate that I never had a bad experience at all. I mean, of course, seniors would come and talk to me and others, maybe the only thing I remember is somebody asked me to perform something or sing a song, but it was a very, very, I would say, relatively mute and less dramatic, definitely not a negative experience at all. Having said that, what you raise is a larger issue that we are facing in education institutions, and Loyola probably is an exceptionally different type of institution where the institutional capacity to handle such issues, but also professors and administrators being actively involved in ensuring a safe environment ensured or at least helped us not to have any such negative experience. And I can say this for my friends as well. I don't know of anybody who went through a serious ragging experience, although we heard from other institutions, especially in engineering colleges, but also in other arts and science colleges across the country, that this was a pernicious practice. In fact, there have been very serious forms of that practice that has led to people having injuries and even death in some exceptional circumstances. So, as an educator, I'm very conscious of the fact that we should have zero tolerance towards it. What could have been a relatively innocent, practice of seniors engaging with the juniors ended up becoming a Frankenstein's monster in later years. But I don't know whether you know this, Upasana. I want to share something that why, by and large, when it comes to our own institutional experience, we never had this problem, because in the year 2009, when we started here, we had some 110 students at Jindal, and it was a 50-acre campus with nobody else here. And in 2010, when the second batch came, just imagine for a moment, 110 students for one full year were living in this 50-acre campus. And they were so bored of each other that when the 2010 batch came, forget ragging, they were just welcoming them.
They were so happy to see more people.
They were so happy to see other people and more people. So a relatively newer institution like us has a different experience, but it does bother me when many young people have become victims of ragging, and it's a matter that we should be seriously concerned about when it comes to India and Indian higher education institutions.
Absolutely, Raj. And in fact, at our institutions, we have now developed buddy projects. Where, the senior students have become buddies of when the junior batches come in. But Raj, see, you took commerce. So that choice of moving to a BCom program was obvious, that you would want to do a BCom program. But you did not stick with it. You moved later, and we'll talk about that later in the interview. But how was your experience studying commerce? I mean, you said that it is about the journey and not so much about the destination. But what was that experience like, studying, doing your undergrad degree in commerce, and that would have influenced your decision later to move towards a legal, academic profession. So why did you think of, commerce, and what was your experience there?
Honestly speaking, it was not a lot of thought process that I had gone through, because as I, at least in my mind, I wasn't sure about what I want to do. Definitely, it was not a natural transition for joining BCom and then to become a chartered accountant, or for that matter, doing an MBA program, which was the choices that many of my friends actually ended up doing. But I ought to say that, students today are far more conscious about the specificity of their discipline in the undergraduate program. And honestly, you don't need to be that. It doesn't need to be like that. I mean, an undergraduate program should open up your mind, should create opportunities for you to think about what you want to do. It's important to go to a good institution than a particular degree program that you end up choosing. In fact, most degree programs would have a very foundational learning that will open up your mind, enable you to think about what you want to do in life, and hopefully lead you to specialized, study programs post that undergraduate program. So I'm a strong believer in that framework of liberal education. The idea of too much of specialization too early on is not something that appealed to me. And actually, I was very fortunate that Loyola gave that space and flexibility. It, of course, had what a traditional BCom degree would have, including commerce and accountancy and economics, but we also had opportunities to look at a more holistic learning experience within the campus. In fact, it gave me room to grow as a young undergraduate student, because you know what, Upasana, undergraduate years are a lot of doubts and discovery that you're going through. You're never sure. There may be some people, a small number of people who are always sure about what they want to do, but a lot of people are not sure about what they want to do. So a good institution should help them open up their minds and enable the process of discovery, meet new people, engage with them, understand oneself and the society at large. And that's exactly what Loyola did. In fact, I would go a step further. Loyola was also a very inclusive institution. While it was attracting some of the elite of Chennai from the top schools into its class, because of its strong commitment towards social inclusion, as well as providing access to people who simply can't afford or even get educated, it always had a significant number of students coming from rural parts of Tamil Nadu, including those who did not go into some of the top schools. So in a way, that was my own, discovery of the other India as well. Because, having born and brought up in a relatively upper middle class family, for me to actually see people who come from more modest backgrounds, but also from rural parts of Tamil Nadu, was a huge discovery that I will always cherish Loyola for that.
No, thank you for saying that, because, in so many of our lives, right after class 12, a decision that we need to take, which is going to define the rest of our lives. So that pressure is always put on us, that anything that you decide today is what your future is going to be shaped by. And perhaps the decision is not so much about the course I will study. It is probably about all the other associated things that you spoke about, the institutions where I find myself in, the friends I make, the way I want to understand the world. And it's about new discoveries, and to be able to keep my mind open perhaps to those discoveries. And that is the journey that will define the future, not the course that you do. And that is actually really something that I think young students today must listen to and hear and think about and reflect on. Because when we talk to parents, this is the biggest pressure that the students have.
And as it is, we already are in a situation where this is the story of arts and science colleges across India. As it is, a lot of students, at least the societal context is that they have not gone into quote-unquote professional education, which is clearly defined by engineering and medicine and to some extent architecture. And the fact that they have not gone into that professional education, they have chosen a path of liberal arts and humanities and social sciences, including commerce and other degrees. The future is uncertain. And of course, as you know, parents in India are constantly seeking certainty. And the nature of these undergraduate programs are, you could pretty much do anything after that. So in a way, for all the students who are making those choices, and now I want to say that this is an extraordinary moment in your life when you are in the path of both self-discovery and also thinking about what is it that you really want to do in life. Frankly, high school education is not enough for a lot of people to be able to make those choices, to make informed choices about your future. The undergrad education forms the foundation for it.
Absolutely. And self-discovery, that this is not something external to you. It is also something internal, because career is often looked at, or jobs or future, as something external that you have to work towards. But it is also as much about you than about what is happening outside. With that, a connected question, Raj, is that, your move from Kanyakumari to Chennai was also a transition in terms of coming from a small city to suddenly into this big city life of Chennai. So how that shape your college life and your self-discovery journey?
So while early schooling was in Kanyakumari, most of my high school, of course, was in Chennai. But having said that, I think from the family standpoint, I was, hugely rooted to my hometown. Almost every year, I would spend several months, particularly summer months, in Kanyakumari and Nagarkoil. So that kind of shaped my thinking. So even though we were living and studying in Chennai, I never felt so much like a city boy. And of course, people, when I go to Nagarkoil and Kanyakumari for my summer vacations, I was never seen to be a kind of a town person there. So there were identities that I was trying to kind of move around. But I do believe that if I were to look back at how that transition was, my home became a very, strong, institution within which I was able to form my own identities as to where I fit in. My parents, like typical, middle class parents, made sure that education and educational accomplishments are absolutely critical for the future, and it's important for me to be grounded, and that grounding within the home helped me to sort of deal with the larger context of it. And frankly speaking, the same thing happens for a lot of us. The socio-economic diversity of a student profile, be it in schools or in colleges, including our own institution, is quite extraordinary. There are people who come from very humble, in modest backgrounds, and there are people who come from extremely affluent backgrounds, and they are together in a class and trying to live their, life, so to say. I do think that this is one of the most difficult challenges which young people face, and it's important for you to have that perspective, and the institution should foster a greater degree of egalitarianism, which will ensure that there is adequate space for people from different backgrounds. That's exactly what Loyola did. You could be one of the richest persons in the state of Tamil Nadu with a lot of business spread over, and you are from relatively modest backgrounds. You're all together in the class, and the culture within Loyola did not allow students to flaunt their wealth and even show any sense of arrogance. And I think that made a huge difference for not just people like me who come from more modest backgrounds, particularly people with professionals who are parents, but also others who are even more difficultly placed. They also found a space within the institution, and I had friends who come from those backgrounds as well.
So the role of institutions that you spoke about in creating and fostering a sense of egalitarianism in the context of, people coming from diverse background, in that, faculty have a tremendous role to play. And in our previous conversation, you spoke about Professor MP Singh in the context to Delhi University, Professor B.B. Pandey, and how they shaped your thought and your life in many ways.
And so Professor Parmanand Singh,
Parmanand
who's of course
Singh.
no more with us, yeah.
So in the context of Loyola College, do you have any such fond memories of faculty and engaging with faculty and how that shaped your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, let me say this, that, from school to college is a very difficult transition, not only because of the fact that schools tend to do a lot of hand-holding with students, and college is supposed to be a more autonomous space where students will discover themselves. But I'm very fortunate that I had some fantastic professors. I mean, Loyola had was known to have good faculty, but I would say few people really I connected with them more strongly than others, and they were all good. But if I were to name a few people, I would say Professor Robert, who was the head of the department, Professor Arunachalam, and also Professor Carlton Young. These three people in particular, for very different reasons, influenced and inspired me a lot. And I think, and I would say many of my batchmates, including, and there was another professor, Professor Alison Rosario, these were people who not only took their responsibility seriously, but they were also conscious of the fact that we are young people coming out of high school into college, and a bit of mentoring and handholding, even when we make mistakes and when we can recover from those mistakes, they were there. And I think they worked with a deep sense of passion and commitment and dedication, but also they were conscious of their role as a mentor more than even a teacher.
What about friends, Raj? And did you have friends purely from, the commerce stream because that's what you were pursuing, or did you have friends across disciplines and how you...
Yeah, well, Loyola is that way a very interesting institution. There are some schools from where a large number of students enter into Loyola. And my school was not one of them. So there were hardly any student who came from my school into Loyola. But there was another school called Don Bosco, which had always a significant number of students coming into Loyola. And what ended up happening is these people knew them before even they came into college. So I had, as I said before, a relatively small group of friends, but we had fantastic memories together, and I'm in touch with almost all of them. But one person is one of my closest friends. His name is Robin Jacob. I remain very closely in touch with him all these years. He has come to campus and he's been wherever I have lived in any part of the world. But there was two other friends, Bala Ganesh as well as Sham. Both of them are doing extremely well. Bala Ganesh, I think, is also now entered into government service as a part of he's a judge in the income tax framework. So in a way, those were really innocent days because we discovered each other. All four came from different backgrounds. We did not knew each other from school, unlike others, but we just gelled together and we had fantastic memories. So as I said before, I have fewer friends, but we are very close to each other. But also, Loyola had a larger circle of friends as well, because it's a relatively small class of BCom. And I must say that my friends were confined to only commerce course. We ended up spending more time. And also, I think one of the things that I realized when I look at our university was the commerce block was separate. And we hanged out separately together in that place. And you end up making friends like that. So geography and architecture also makes a huge difference for people. Our institution doesn't have a separate law school block and business school block. Students tend to use common spaces more. But in Loyola, my friends were limited to BCom degree program. But we had wonderful time together. And I think one of the things about friends is that my friendships, at least, was not confined only to people belonging to my batch. In fact, one of my very dear friend, we were actually together both in school and in college. His name is Saravanan, but he's popularly known as Surya. But basically, Surya is a movie actor. But one of the things, again, you not only get inspiration from people who are, accomplished as individuals, or people who are greatly successful or public figures. You get inspiration from your friends as well. So Surya, for example, even then, he comes from a very, very accomplished, family, whose father was a very distinguished film actor in Tamil Nadu. They are, of course, he comes from an affluent family, but his personality, his own humility and self-effacing nature and his simplicity was quite extraordinary. And all through his school and college days, we shared that friendship. And I can say that, those things subconsciously influences you more than what you learn in a classroom or what you study in books. Because when you look at other people's lives and you see, even with so much of privilege, somebody is as humble as they are, which is exactly what Surya is. And I've treasured that friendship, and he remains a very dear and a close friend of mine. And I have seen with extraordinary admiration his rise in the film world. And even then, today, he's one of the leading actors in the film industry, not just confined to Tamil Nadu, but his humility and gracefulness remains unchanged. And we've hosted him on our campus a few times. And everybody who meets him will end up having the same feeling. So I think for all those young people who end up sometimes become pretentious or become arrogant, or their self becomes too significant for them to deal with, their success makes them more arrogant. They need to learn from the lives of people like Surya, who have accomplished so much and yet remain humble. And that's another important lesson that our young people should have.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Raj. But did you also participate, like in, say, cultural activities? Were you part of the sport? I mean, sports, I know we spoke about your love for cricket. But were you part of, say, student festivals and cultural activities that happen on campus?
Well, you know what? sports almost ended in school, so I simply was not involved in any sporting activity. I was not, my foray into singing.
Yeah,
So
I
cultural
know.
activities was not something that I had done. But one thing was, I was very keen even at that time, trying to make a difference around the spaces that I was being part of. I was conscious of the fact that students and student representatives can play a role in making a difference to the community and society surrounding it. So I want to say that that was my first effort. I stood for elections.
Oh, you did?
Yes, yes. So the Commerce Association typically has a Commerce Association secretary, which is like the head of the commerce, entire commerce department, a student rep, and the students would vote for you. And I actually campaigned for that election, and believe it or not, I won that election, and I became the secretary of the Commerce Association. Now, the reason this became interesting and important for me is that this was the first time for me to engage with students across different sections and people, and try to connect with them with an agenda. And the journey was quite extraordinary because you need to talk and persuade about it. It was still very modest. Student associations were not, as Loyola was not like Delhi University in terms of an active political community advancing the student association agenda. But I won that election, and one of our biggest contributions, and I think when I look back, we were the first batch who produced a booklet for very modest outcomes. But think about it. Till then, it's an old institution, right? Till then, no student batch had produced at the time of graduation a simple booklet with all the names, addresses, telephone numbers of the graduating batch. We did an enormous amount of work. This was pre-email days, connecting with people and gathering data and producing that. And that book was released at the time of a farewell. And of course, I also got the Best Outgoing Student Award as an outcome or as my contribution to that. So these were interesting times for me. But more importantly, I really felt that the institution provided me space to do what I wanted to.
No, Raj, it's very, very interesting to me because, one of the things that we say when we talk about institution building is that you need to be able to create institutional memory. And that kicked in case of you long back.
Yes.
And you were in the process of, this building institutional memory
and we called that booklet Sweet Memories.
Oh, you called it Sweet Memories.
Yeah,
so, this whole process of that we keep talking about that an institution must have, and a building of institutional memory. So on that thought on memory, what is, you spoke about all the various aspects, but what would be your best memory of your time at Loyola?
You see, you're right. There is not one such best memory, but if I were to identify the best times that we had in Loyola, I don't think my professors in Loyola are going to like this, but school was so regimented, and you wear a uniform and go to school, and you know when you have to go and when you have to return back home. College is the first time when you get freedom. A, you're not wearing a uniform, and B, your times are not so regulated. Because I'm living in Chennai, and my parents expect me to come home by evening. But what happens in the day, I have greater control. So my greatest memories are when we were watching movies in the afternoons with my friends. And I have this very funny story to share. One of my very good friends, Robin Jacob. Robin Jacob comes from a very traditional family in Chennai, and they are very renowned family as well. They engage in carpets and all of that. So till Loyola, he had never gone to a movie theater.
Oh.
He's a very, very protective family. And all his cars, the family cars, they have a number plate which says 888. So that's their number. You can find, and he of course was driving a car which had the 888 number. So everybody in the city will be able to recognize that if it's 888, it's the Jacob family's car. Robin became a movie buff with me, and we would, and along with other friends, would watch movies left, right, and center. And very funnily, because his car number was so recognizable, we would park that car somewhere away from the movie theater and then walk to the movie theater, because if it is found in a movie theater, clearly there's a problem. Of course, later years, I'm sure his parents got to know, but that was a very special moment. And when he told me about this, I was shocked, because and you can also see how diverse family situations are, that he was far more protective as a family for him to actually go to a movie theater. And he never stopped going to movie theater since he met me.
Thank you for sharing that story. Perhaps a good idea would have been to park it outside the library.
That's right.
And then go to
exactly. We've done that as well.
Oh, you've done that.
A bookshop, something more obscure.
No, but thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. And I find it very interesting because, when we think about college life and from the perspective of, like you say, school student or a parent to a school student, you think of it as something that will, that you need to must learn or acquire to go to the next stage. But if you look back and think there is so much more to college life that we take away, which actually shaped us as persons, which is beyond what is happening in the context of the classroom or, in the context of the course or a degree that you decided to do.
And the most important part of that is personality development.
Absolutely.
Frankly, if I had not met so many people with such diverse backgrounds in Loyola, if I had not appreciated the need for social inclusion, where Loyola is an institution who provides scholarships for those who can't access education, if I had not felt the sense of egalitarianism there, think about it. These are Christian institutions, and my religion is different from Christianity, but I never felt uncomfortable for a moment being part of this institution, because the larger, sense of pluralism was deeply embedded in the institution, where people from different faiths and beliefs can continue to do what they want to do and express themselves freely with autonomy and independence. I think those are the kind of values. And one thing I realize is that many a time when we are living through that experience, we don't get it. But when we look back at that experience, we are able to appreciate what that experience truly was and how it significantly impacted us.
Raj, the other question that I have is that, undergrad education, as much as it is about, discovering the self and learning new things and making new friends and a sort of holistic personality development, there is always a stress at the back of our minds as to what does the future hold in terms of jobs, in terms of career. Did you ever undergo a stress like that?
Yeah, well, it's a very important question. I think it is deeply saddening to see a lot of young people going through significant levels of stress. The mental health of young people today, not just during COVID, but even otherwise, is seriously impacted. And there is a lot of anxiety about the future as well. I think, thankfully, or rather fortunately, I never had any form of stress during my college years. And I think I would attribute maybe 5 important things that I had personally, for my own life, which really helped me. And to a large extent, I was very fortunate. First, I think, is the home environment. My parents and my younger brother, the home environment was fostering an ecosystem that did not, allow me to have any stress, because my whatever needs and aspirations or things that I wanted to have, I got it. But more importantly, I was able to pursue my own dreams and aspirations, and that was a very important part of how a lot of stress can get reduced. The second, I think, is the college ecosystem. It gave so many opportunities for us to do different things, and it ensured that no student is left behind. And I think that's a lot of credit ought to go to Loyola College to ensure that differently enabled students are also having a space and a voice in that ecosystem. And that was also something that how an education institution can help. The third is the teachers. The teachers of Loyola College were more approachable and accessible to students. So in case students have any difficulty, and I'm sure many of us have had different types of difficulties, and they were ready to accept it and handle it, respond to it. Coming back to the parents one, I have to share a very important incident in my life. It's a small incident. I was in Loyola. I think it was first year. My father had bought a very expensive camera. It was then called Minolta camera. He was visiting Japan and he bought that camera. And we would use that camera for some home occasions. And he told to all of us multiple times that it's a very precious camera, and you should be very responsible when it comes to using it. You will never use it without his presence. And it was told to us multiple times. And on one occasion, for an event that was happening in college, I, without his knowledge or my parents' knowledge, I took this camera, this precious Minolta camera, and took it to my college and had that event. And sadly, I lost the camera.
You lost the camera?
I lost it. And in fact, you talked about stress. That was the only time I
can feel that stress.
I was stressed out for that, because, and I was going through, I tried, and I would say for 2 weeks, I did not tell my parents about it. And for 2 weeks, the entire college did all kinds of things to locate that camera. My friends, my teachers, my department, my lost property people, everybody tried, but unfortunately, the camera could not be found. And after 2 weeks, and now typically it's out. It was supposed to be inside a safe place, so nobody's checking whether it's there or not. So I, with lot of trepidation, I told my father that I lost the camera. And so it's not just lost the camera. I took it without his knowledge, and then did what he's asked me not to do, and I lost it. And for a middle class family, it was a very expensive thing to do. And quite remarkably, he said it's okay. And I mean, otherwise, my father is a pretty strict disciplinarian, but he completely was fine and said, you know what, you're more important to me than the camera.
Oh, kind.
And it's okay. And that was such a huge moment for me personally, because, I mean, as kids, you do so many things, and the fact that you are forgiven for your mistakes, small or big, influences your own thinking and perspective. And I think that's something, again, talking about stress, these were moments when what could have been a disastrous situation and a hugely stressful environment completely became something more. And I felt even more guilty. That's another matter, that it was all fine. So talking about the parental ecosystem. The fourth one was friends as well. Loyola, I was very fortunate, and all of us had our own groups of friends and people who were there to sort of help and share and ensure that we had any major issues or mutually dealt with. And the last thing I would say is that this is something which, pre-social media. And I think that the constant validation that young people seek through social media is also possibly impacting, their expectations and also their own identity within our society. We were in a far more carefree environment. We had no intention to seek so much of public validation about what we are doing. I am personally amazed by the fact that, in the social media, there are people you can unfriend them.
Yeah, I can.
And unfriending somebody can be a huge source of, disappointment and, betrayal. And that causes stress among people. So we are obviously looking at a different type of society, and it's absolutely important for us to tell our young people, our children, our students to be grounded, even in this cacophony of constant validation and seeking validation, likes and dislikes, becoming a friend and unfriending yourself. You need to find your own space and to be confident about your own self, because ultimately that sense of confidence and identity is going to build your self-worth, and which will ultimately shape your future as well.
Raj, thank you. I think all the 5 points that you've highlighted are so important to be talking about. But I must say that I found that story about your father in the camera so endearing. But at the same time, it tells you also about how much it matters to us. To be able to give your parents, not a cause to worry about you. Or, and that moment when you felt that they will be disappointed.
I was pleasantly surprised, because my mother, I know that she will be fine. But for my father to be so forgiving and understanding was quite a remarkable thing, and I'll never forget that. And for those of you who are living in that time, Minolta camera from Japan is a big deal. You don't lose it.
I know. And that act of kindness and that act of forgiveness remained with you.
Yes.
And I think that is truly remarkable, because no matter, and you spoke about social media, you spoke about the instant kind of validation that today's generation seek often, and the kind of anxieties and stresses that itself can create. But at the same time, if you have a solid ecosystem in your parents, in your friends, perhaps that help you keep you grounded, and you're able to deal with all of these external factors in a much more confident manner. So Raj, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. We will soon talk to you again, and would delve deeper into the academic life, your transition to Delhi University, and the college life at Delhi University, and how that shaped some of the decisions that you have taken. So thank you very much for joining in, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Upasana. It was a pleasure talking to you again.
Thank you. Thank you. We are signing off.